You're recording there.
It is hard.
We're going to get ready to start this meeting, and so if we can have conversations go outside, and we'll get going. Mr. Whittleton, let's introduce the folks around.
Start with me.
Yep.
John Weddleton.
Felix Rivera.
Tim Steele.
Dick Trainee.
Forrest Dunbar.
Eric Croft.
Red Dyson.
Christopher Constant. Lee Fever, Chigac Electric. Arthur Miller, Chigac Electric.
Anybody
Someone
online?
online.
Who's online?
Who's online?
Who's online? Do we know? Might want to ask.
Rose?
Can we have whoever's online introduce themselves, please?
Nobody?
Amy Dabowski.
Amy Dabowski online. I want to thank the mayor for and Mr. Fever and Johnson for their presentation today, our announcement today, and we're kind of continuing on with it. Suzanne LaFrance has joined us. So we're gonna go through and get another more in-depth, perhaps, presentation as to what we got, where we're going, and see how it goes. Approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
All right. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Stever, I think you're up. I think you got the short straw or the long straw or something in terms of.
Chairman Steele, Assembly members, thank you very much. With me today is Arthur Miller. He's kind of the detail guy that's put all these numbers together, so I thought who better to walk through the overall deal than Arthur. We talked pretty quick, I guess, with the press conference. What we'd like to do is go into a little bit more detail and maybe go through a little bit slower. You can see some of the numbers and kind of the essence of the overall deal for the public. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Arthur. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, and it really is a pleasure to be here this morning. As Lee had indicated earlier, we really view this as a win-win-win type of a structure. It's a win for the ratepayers of municipality of MLMP. It's a win for the ratepayers of the Chigac Electric Association, and it's a win for the municipality of Anchorage. And really what we're doing is we're creating savings through this transaction as a result of combined operations. And those reductions in savings, because we are a cost-based electric utility, will translate into lower electric rates in what consumers will pay, not just for tomorrow, but this really is a long-term play for the benefit of both organizations or both customer bases and the municipality of Anchorage to increase efficiencies. But it also provides additional revenue to the municipality of Anchorage for key services. And it's also a very good time because the interest rate environment remains relatively low in relationship to past or historical standards. The value.
For the record, Mr. Peterson has joined us. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Just wanted to, or should we ask questions as we go, or wait to the end?
Let's wait until we'll have a pause here at some point, and we can ask those questions.
The value of the acquisition really to the municipality of Anchorage is it allowed the MOA to monetize the value of MLMP really in two fundamental ways. Number one, through the equity that the MOA has with MLMP, and number two, as part of the transaction terms, that any assets that are not needed by Chugach for the transaction is then be conveyed back to the MOA at net book value. In addition to this monetization, we've also committed to continuing with as Mr. Thieber had mentioned earlier, the MUSA type payment, or the payment in lieu of taxes for a 30-year period, which allows the municipality to continue receiving those revenues that they were receiving when they had under the full ownership of ML&P. It also results in lower electric rates to the entire municipality. That is to say, the customers, or the retail customers of the utilities, include the municipality of Anchorage entities, if you will, and those result in lower rates. On top of that, as a cooperative, we don't earn profits. We have margins, and those margins are returned back as a form of capital credits to members in the future. And right now, the benefit of that with ML&P customers, those capital credits, if you are not being directly returned to the specific member. We really look at this transaction from a benefit, from a long-term efficiency and cost reduction perspective. But this transaction is very unique in really three fundamental or primary ways. Number one, Chugach is acquiring ML&P, and it's under a cooperative business structure. There really is not a lower electric utility structure, if you will, from a cost of service perspective that's lower than a cooperative structure. Number two, we reduce duplication of facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about this further. But unlike other transactions, this transaction, where we have adjacent service territories, we can capitalize on additional efficiencies resulting from that. And number three is really resource management and efficiency, that is to say, economies of scale. By combining organizations, we can do things more efficiently through the economies of scale perspective. From a cooperative business structure, the benefits include local control through a member-elected board of directors, and the member-elected are from our customers, our customer base. I mentioned earlier the retirement of an allocation of capital credits to retail members. As a cooperative, we do not pay federal income taxes. We also have an overall lower cost of capital than an investor-owned utility or a municipal utility. And those, again, result in direct savings or reductions in costs that are passed on to the ratepayers. In Alaska, we have a unique rate-making adjustment process for electric cooperatives, and it's called the simplified rate filing process, and it allows us to streamline base rate adjustments, either positive or negative, on a very efficient basis. And there's a significant benefit to that we can make adjustments to rates without incurring a tremendous amount of costs associated with a general rate case, which can be very expensive, upwards of $500,000 to $2 million to do a general rate case filing. And in this process will help. It won't eliminate the need for general rate cases, but it certainly will minimize the number or reduce the number of times when we have to do general rate cases. Chugach also has been around a long time. Chugach has fit, willing, and able to provide electric service. We've been doing it for decades, and we know the industry inside and out, and we know Alaska inside and out. We also recognize the reduction or the duplication of facilities. We don't need two headquarters complex buildings. We can combine functions throughout the organization for maximization of economies of scale. We don't need two call centers, as another example. We can look at the generation resources of both utilities and determine which resources that we may be able to remove from service that will no longer be needed for the provision of electric service. We've also agreed that we would convey, as I mentioned earlier, any surplus real estate to the municipality of Anchorage. In addition to that, there's other savings or efficiencies that we'll realize from this. Right now, both Chugach and MLP, along with other Revel utilities, are responsible for the oversight of Bradley Lake, including the hydroelectric project, the South Central Power Project, and the Alaska Intertide. We'll see additional efficiencies by reducing the number of participants in these activities. The other area is resource management and efficiency. Really, we're talking about economies of scale, and this will come as a savings throughout the entire organization. Mr. Thiebert had mentioned legal and regulatory, environmental earlier, and those savings will be significant. As I mentioned too, on the simplified rate filing process, that additional savings will be realized through the regulatory process. But it's also in engineering and procurement and project management, consolidation of utility expertise, and also the leverage of new investment and how the industry is changing. This is going to help position certainly Chugach for long-term viability and recognition of the underlying structural changes that are occurring in the electric utility industry. Be that distributed generation, increased customer requirements for electric service, rate options. All of this allows for greater economies of scale, that we can provide greater services to our members at lower ultimate cost, and really maximize the utilization of our assets. And that really is what this is all about at the end of the day, is to utilize our assets in the most efficient way that we possibly can. This chart on the left shows the Chugach service territory within the Anchorage Bowl and Municipal Light and Power's service territory within the Anchorage Bowl. And on the right-hand side identifies Chugach's service territory in south central Alaska, which we have customers in the Beluga-Tyonek area, as well as south towards Moose Pass and Cooper Landing, the town of Whittier, Girdwood, Portage, and the rest of the Anchorage Bowl area. This chart shows a more detailed view of the contiguous nature of our service territories, again, which allows even greater efficiencies than a lot of transactions of this nature in the lower 48. In fact, our headquarters building is located closer to ML&P's customers in a lot of ways than our headquarters is located to many of our existing customers on the Chugach system. Some of the other benefits of consolidation, it really strengthens our long-term competitiveness through economies of scale. And I also want to highlight the fact of the increased utilization of assets. ML&P's system, as it generally peaks in the morning hours during the wintertime. Chugach's system, which is largely residential based, peaks in the evening hours. And because of that symmetry, if you will, allows us to utilize generation assets more efficiently as we go forward. Now, those are long-term investments. We won't see the benefit of that immediately on a long-run cost basis as far as physical assets. We will see some additional efficiencies resulting from efficiencies in gas with a structure like this. The other fundamental benefit is a stronger balance. This transaction from time will give Chugach a stronger balance sheet that will help us be able to make ongoing business decisions and strengthens our position to continue with capital investments where we see needed. It also facilitates the integration of renewable generation. With the combined resources of Chugach and ML&P, we have additional water, hydroelectric generation resources available that will help us streamline renewable projects into the system. It also allows us to leverage our purchasing power, if you will. We, as Mr. Thiebert mentioned, we are both owners in the Blue River unit, and that ownership will increase to about two-thirds if this transaction moves forward, that gives us greater ability to, with operation of the Beluga River unit field and for additional gas procurements. There's other efficiencies with economic dispatch and long-term capital investment, and certainly how we manage our generation assets and transmission assets and the scheduling of maintenance associated with those assets. We do want to take just a moment and talk about the underlying structure of the transaction. This really is a rate-based, rate of return approach to evaluation. And when we say that, the municipal light and power is really, like any company, is funded by debt and equity. And our acquisition price includes the payment of MLMP debt plus the estimated defeasance costs, which are $542 million in total. MLMP equity of $170 million, which is a total of $712 million. That's the amount of dollars that will be paid to MLMP at closing. In addition to that, CUGEX is committed to paying an additional $170 million over the next 30 years as part of the price of the acquisition, which gets the multiple, if you will, commensurate with other transactions in the lower 48. In addition to that, CUGEX has committed to including payments in lieu of taxes, or PILT, over the next 30 years, and that totals, on a net present value basis, $142.1 million, resulting in the transaction being just over $1 billion. From a total value, on a transaction basis, the value to the municipality of Anchorage is the extinguishment of long-term debt, the lump sum payment of equity, the additional acquisition payments, the PILT, and there's additional benefits on top of that, that is in the form of capital credits that are paid to the municipality of Anchorage. We expect to lease parts of the properties from the municipality of Anchorage over a 5-year period during this transition stage. And there's also reduced rates to the municipality of Anchorage. And these figures are over a 40-year period on the estimated additional savings. The benefit to ratepayer includes reduced electric rates of approximately $110, $111 million to $220 million, and then additional $170 million in capital credits that are returned to members. This chart shows the total upfront payment amount of $712 million, and then it shows the combined annual payments of $312 million, and those annual payments are comprised of payments in lieu of taxes of $142.1 and annual acquisition payments in total of $170.3 million in time. The transaction really results in overall cost to the community at large, and that really is the primary motivating factor in the transaction. And as I mentioned, it's a very unique situation, given that it's a cooperative acquiring a municipal utility with adjacent service territories, allowing us to really achieve greater efficiencies and savings for ratepayers. It will also allow the MOA to decrease their debt and increase investment in the MOA trust. But it also provides other benefits. And one thing that CUGEX looks at in a sustainability context is what's the impact from a financial, an environmental, and a social perspective. And we talked about the financial benefits, but on an environmental basis, it also provides lower carbon impact due to additional efficiencies in generation. We will be able to lower our curtailments on Fire Island wind, providing additional benefit from a carbon perspective, allowing us to use a increased amount of our portfolio on renewable generation. It also provides the municipality of Anchorage to continue providing necessary services for the community. And this transaction supports those activities as well for the benefit of the entire Anchorage community. We view the transaction as a win-win, again, for True Gas customers, MLMP customers, and the municipality of Anchorage, ideally through long-term cost reductions. We keep local control under the cooperative business structure, including return of capital credits. As Mr. Hebert mentioned earlier, there's no employee layoffs. The right sizing, if you will be done through attrition, and there'll be continued emphasis on training and employee development. And through this process, we really are committed to working with all the stakeholders to see the overall transaction be a success, not just for the benefit of this year or next year, but for decades to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions. Mr. Trainee, you wanted
Rebecca, when are you
start out?
planning on introducing this to the assembly from the administration?
In the draft ordinance, it's in the
When?
works right now. I think we will have something to circulate next week. The one moving piece at this point is fine-tuning the language that addresses how the proceeds of the sale are directed to assure that the payment in lieu of tax is deemed to be under the cap, and that the remainder of the sale proceeds are managed through the trust. So that's the piece that we're still working on finessing in the language right now. So after Christmas, we should
Here's,
have something.
because if you introduce this on the 9th, then we could not have a public hearing until the 23rd. And that's the date in which the thing must pass the assembly. So I'm just wondering if you have a version of this that would meet the requirements, that I could have a special meeting on the 26th, just to introduce this to the assembly, so then I can move the hearing potentially to the 16th of January. I just want to make sure we've got enough time for everybody to come and testify.
Certainly. I think, I believe under the code you can hold a public hearing 7 days, I'll refer to Mr. Gates, I that's what I do, 7 days after the date of introduction. So a better structure may be to make sure that we get it right and then introduce and hold an additional public hearing.
Well, if you talk to Dean Gates, I want to make sure both legal heads, I don't want us to get to the point where we don't have enough time to deal with this.
I completely understand your point. I think at this point we're just trying to make sure we get the language right to make sure the financial mechanism is in place. So we'll put our heads together and make sure that we have something that
Great.
allows you to
Thank
have
you, ma'am.
adequate public hearing time.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Weddleton. You had a question earlier. I don't know if it's been answered.
Well, I guess it's pretty broad. I don't know. This is nice and it looks good, but there's really no numbers here. Some things like, you say you'll have a stronger balance sheet, but you're taking on a huge amount of debt. Does this help your balance sheet? And then we talk about lower rates to consumers, which may happen. I'd like to see it. It seems like intuitively we would, but you're already doing power pooling, so you're pretty efficient there already.
I haven't.
So there's a lot of this stuff that would decrease rates is already happening. Your balance sheet gets worse. I got a list of things like that, but do you have numbers? You must have numbers because
So
you bid on this.
The GX's current equity is 28%. This transaction and structure will reduce our equity from 28% to approximately 14%. However, through time, that equity will continue to build equity through time, and that provides much greater leverage, if you will, with those additional assets. The additional efficiencies, you are absolutely correct. We do have a lot of efficiencies with the power pooling. However, there's additional efficiencies that can be realized through that. That is to say, we don't need 2 dispatch centers, and we can optimize the system greater through that process by just having one organization doing that rather than several.
Okay, can I follow up?
Go.
So we're in a situation with MLMP where the RCA has said that they are undercapitalized, so they can't pay dividends to the city. Can the RCA look at you and say, we don't like this equity ratio that you've got now. You can't pay the payment in lieu of taxes or something like that? So some of this would collapse.
So this structure is contingent on the Regulatory Commission of Alaska approval. And as part of that approval process, and what we'll be bringing before the Commission will be approval to pay these dollar amounts to the municipality of Anchorage. And number 2, that we will have assurance that we will be able to recover those costs from electric rate payments.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
You can go back. Just some more general, it might not be to you, but we had the resolution, I think in June, that said you guys should look into merging, or I don't remember exact phrasing. But then we got a letter from MEA saying, hey, we want in on this, or at least to talk. So I mean, is this process, did we have one bidder? Were you the only bidder? Who else? Can you embellish on
I think
that?
we need to turn those questions over to.
Through the chair, we went through a process, and obviously with your resolution in June, it was public that we were going to go through a process with Chugach. As a result of that process, others did come to us to express interest, MEA being one. And we worked through with those other entities there to determine what their level of interest was. We have non-disclosure agreements with all of the entities, and so we're not able to disclose who they are, but there were other participants in the process.
We had a meeting also where we talked about
Right, I understand.
who the players were and
was
what
there.
they were. I
I
have
just
a
want to
number.
make sure it's vetted, people understand.
Yeah,
This is
sure.
a broad
And I hope at
issue.
some time we will get more of an idea as to your health and your figures. And so it would be nice to get something in that regard too, so that we can have confidence that you're not having a problem. The other question I had was, will there be a seat or two on your board for a municipality?
Well, I think that's something that we talked at the board level. I think we're gonna have further discussions about, the ability to potentially go from a 7-member board to a 9-member board. Certainly, at every election, everybody votes, so ultimately, you will have representation. The question becomes, do we want to expand the size of it to have more representation?
Sure.
Or if there's regional versus at-large, as we currently are.
Do they have to be members of the co-op? Do they have to get their energy from you in order to be on the board?
That's correct.
So we have not been eligible up until a merger takes place.
That's correct. And I guess to address your, the balance sheet issues, this does add debt, obviously, to
Sure.
the Chugach balance sheet. But as a cooperative, we're in a very different market than I think an investor-owned utility would be, or a muni. And in our market, having a 10% equity is just fine. And they recognize that we're nonprofit cooperatives. So the financial picture, the rating agencies, we're an A-rated organization, and we go to the capital markets. That is very acceptable in our market. So it's just a different market that we go after than what you would see through the municipality.
Mr. Dyson, you were next.
Thank you. On page 11, our English language is amazing in how the same term can apply to lots of different things. So the ML&P equity line, I think of equity meaning assets, and you're using it as a liability. What am I missing?
Well, I think there's two components. You've got, for MLP, you've got debt and you've got equity.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is we're going to basically provide funding to MLP to cover the debt. So we pay enough so they can defease that debt, so that takes that off the table. And we pay for MLP's equity.
So the equity, ML&P has an asset, the equity, and you're reimbursing for the transfer of that.
Right. I mean, the
That
assets.
confused me. Thank you.
The assets are both, they're all with the assets, and the debt and the equity is
Got it.
on the other side.
Yeah, all right, that
Okay.
helps. And just a general thing, I mean, you've done this really well. It feels like a little bit of a sales thing, but perhaps should. But when you say, like the next to the last one down, at payment in lieu of taxes, you put 142 million, would have been helpful if you'd have said on the document over 30 years. Yeah.
That's,
Because Yeah.
And we apologize, it's in a footnote that says it's the net present value based on a 5% discount rate over.
The small print down the
Small
bottom.
print, so I
Yeah.
apologize for that.
So you're not only dealing with relatively ignorant people like me, but the whole population out there that will see this and want to analyze it. Just,
Mr.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I want to get down in the weeds a little bit. It'll take 4 or 5 minutes on the Fire Island thing that.
Let's do that after we get the other questions,
Yeah,
initial
and
questions.
that's certainly
Okay.
fine.
Mr. Constable.
Thank you. Two things. Just having heard this notion of a special meeting, I would be much more comfortable with a special meeting in advance of the public hearing. The public hearing would be wise, I think, to make it not a special meeting, but an actual regular meeting, so that the public knows that we're not trying to move the ball. The introduction would be whatever day is legal, in my opinion, but I think that let's try to stick, if it's the 9th, then the 9th. That way, everything is clear and open and right in track with our regular order of business. And then the question that I have, you spoke plenty about no layoffs, and that's a great idea, but I didn't hear you speak about labor practices, so I'd like to hear a little bit about the commitment of Chugash Electric to using our IBW labor and how you're going to engage in that conversation should this move forward.
Okay, great question. You know, obviously, we have IBW employees as well. We have 3 agreements: office and engineering, our production area, and then the line area. And so we've been working with the IBW now for several months and talking about a potential transaction and trying to get them involved early on to get their questions answered, to make sure that at the end of the day they're comfortable and they feel that their positions and their jobs are protected. We will be working over the next probably 30 days on individual groups within the IBW and management to take the agreement that they've got with ML&P and moving it into the 3 different collective bargaining agreements. So we want to make sure that there's a seamless transition, that we look at all the wages and the working rules and so forth, and how they move from one organization to the other. From an overall, you know, we're very close, I think, in wages and benefits. There's going to be a little bit of difference in working rules. There's issues to deal with on how do you deal with job bidding, how do you deal with seniority rights, and I think some of those are probably the more difficult ones that we'll have to work with. But we are geared to sitting down with the union, working out all these details, and making sure that these employees are well taken care of.
I guess along that line also, are there other bargaining units that we have that you don't have? Or how about our municipal employees that go across? Do they have a representation of some sort, or will they have?
Chair, we do not have any other represented employees other than those that are represented by the IBEW. We have some non-represented employees, which are some supervisors and executive employees, but the commitment from Chugash is that everybody comes over. So we don't have any other unions that provide services for us within ML&P.
So they're getting to continue their job in essence as they go across. But
And we make the same commitments on, you know, wages and benefits to management people as well as the bargaining unit.
okay, good. Where was I here? Mr. Trainee, you wanted to respond?
Chris, we're going to have multiple meetings. What I was talking about was just introducing this item.
I get that.
We're going to have multiple work sessions between now and the date on the 23rd. We have to take action because I want to make sure the public knows completely about it. What I was talking about was another meeting.
And the
just
will.
introduce this item to
Absolutely.
get into our document.
I totally understand that there was just a little bit of verbal conversation that's happened. Maybe have a meeting on the 16th that would be a public hearing.
No, there'll be multiple public hearings. I intend to make sure that happens.
And
To
Sorry, I apologize.
ML&P and to Chugash, you guys use the guidelines that we gave you in our June resolution as the basis for coming forward to us on this?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so I want to make sure.
Yes, we started the conversation of that, as Mr. Thiebert and I believe the mayor mentioned in the press conference. We figured out early on that merger didn't actually work because of the separate structures of the 2 utilities. But we then looked to how could we achieve something like a merger without actually merging.
Thanks for using that resolution, we appreciate it. Thank you.
Did you have a comment?
Oh, so, Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, I think that my point was just that there are several, under the code, there are different options. You could have a special meeting to introduce, you could also have several special meetings
Sure.
in which you provide additional public hearing opportunities before the end date. And Mr. Gates also pointed out that the 30th of January is the last day for action to get it on the ballot, so there is some flexibility for additional special meetings after the regular meeting as well, if the.
I just want to make sure we absolutely have everything scheduled, so we don't get to a point in time where we don't have enough time to get this on the ballot, if that's what the
Understood, yeah.
body chooses to do.
Mr. Croft?
Yeah, on your advantages of the merger, pages 5 and 6, lower cost of capital than ML&P, you have the combined entity will have lower cost than either had, I guess compared to what?
So the capital structure, it's a complicated question. The capital structure of ML&P, they have different return requirements than an electric cooperative. And as a result of that, they're higher than an electric cooperative.
Municipal owned is higher than cooperatives.
Yes. And right now, with this transaction, we would be looking at approximately $2 million in annual savings, replacing their full capitalization, if you will, their debt and their equity with our debt. That in and of itself, with the fees, would be about $3 million a year in annual savings. Because they're at the detailed level, their return on equity is substantially different than an electric cooperative, if you will. And that really is a driving factor between the differences between the two utilities.
These benefits are sort of a mix of benefits.
Mr. Croft?
Yeah,
You're
the
next.
Chugach rate pairs to ML&P and to the combined entity, sort of comparing, because you list no income taxes. Neither of us paid income tax, just for different reasons.
That's correct. But if we put that in there because if an investor-owned utility,
Right.
for example, would pay an income tax.
And then just a couple more. So the SRF, in what way is this streamlining the base rate adjustment process as opposed to what the two individual entities had to do before?
So currently, ML&P files general rate cases every 3 to 5 years to adjust their base rates. In contrast, in general, Chugach files general rate cases on a less frequent basis, other than, albeit with the exception of the last several years due to the loss of wholesale customer loads and the addition of SP South Central Power Plant. So we have the ability to adjust base demand and energy rates as a result of both changes in cost levels as well as changes in sales levels. And a good example of that, as Mr. Hebert mentioned earlier today, about sales being relatively flat or going down with utilities. ML&P today, to be able to adjust rates, would have to go into a formal general rate case proceeding. And that can cost in excess of $500,000 to $2 million in approximate rough dollars. In contrast, Chugach has the simplified rate filing process as a cooperative. And we make base rate adjustments either up or down on a quarterly basis based on changes both in cost levels and in sales levels without having to go through a full adjudicatory process to establish rates. And that provides efficiencies not only for Chugach but for the Regulatory Commission of Alaska as well. And they are substantial. The formal general rate case proceeding can take upwards of 15 months to fully adjudicate, whereas under the simplified rate filing process, we can get final rates within 45 days after a filing with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. Now, there are limitations on the simplified rate filing process. The rate levels are capped at 8% on base rate changes in a 12-month period, and 20% over a 3-year period. Those are fairly significant caps, if you will, that we really don't operate up against at all.
Then the final thing, just, and I'll let it go
I have
to
you.
other questioners. It's been said a couple of times you're adding significant debt, and you are. Are you about doubling your customer base though? My impression was we had fewer customers in MLP, but some big ones, so you were effectively doubling your load or your business.
Yeah, I think right now we've got 68,000 members, and MLP probably has 31,000.
Yeah.
The difference being you have a lot of commercial load, so we have like 1.1 million megawatt hours on an annual basis, and MLP is probably 1.2. So on the kilowatt hour sales, it's about double.
Fewer customers, but a lot of big ones.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you. So actually, I wanted to ask the same question that Eric did about the SRF, and just to simplify, were you saying that basically it's because you as a co-op have some special exception in the law that allows you to do this that the municipality doesn't?
That's correct.
Okay,
yes.
great. The second question I had was about on page 6, you talk about generation reserve and retiring surplus generation. Could you explain a little more in depth about which facilities exactly you're thinking, or is it particular, even just turbines within certain facilities, or which generation would be retired as you do that?
I think we have to do an overall study and review. I don't think we have a target at this point. What we do have is Beluga has a very similar size of machines that Plant 2 does. So I think what we have to do, and then we've got an IGT unit, which is our old generators at our IGT station.
Yeah.
You have similar older units at Plant 1. So I think what we need to do is take a look at all of it, find out which ones are in the best shape, in the best condition, and then try to reduce the net. We have probably more reserves than what we need with the two organizations together.
And I just want to sort of highlight that. I think that's actually a really exciting possibility to me, because we all know that most of our older units, not the hydro, but our older burning units are less efficient, put out more fumes and are more expensive to maintain. And so I think that's a great benefit potentially for the combined organization.
Mr. Dyson, you had another request?
Yeah, thank you. On page 10, benefits of consolidation. My guess is that fuel supply, that the balance of what the two companies have owned in terms of gas generation fields and contracts for fuel supply are different, and that I think that what you're doing here will benefit everybody. Yeah. Anyways, would you talk about if there's a benefit from the combined organization's fuel supply assets?
Yeah, I think the one thing that we made clear in our proposal is that the MLP gas acquisition, that amount of gas production that goes to MLP customers today will continue to go to MLP customers through at least 2033. And that's where the decline rate of the field is down to where we're going to have to make significant more investments if we're going to continue the life of the field. I think the one benefit we have is having more gas. It's much easier to contract and get better pricing if you have a larger economy of scale per se. We also believe it'll be much easier to work, as the majority owner with our partners in the gas field to make sure we have, better investments, I think, long term to make sure we get greater efficiencies from the field.
Yeah. If I may want to follow up. I'd appreciate what your estimate of the availability of gas and cook inlet is long term. My own conviction is there's enough gas there for decades and so on, but do your geologists agree?
There's definitely adequate supplies. I mean, we've gone through these cycles about is there enough gas or not, and a lot of times it depends on who is out there looking. And we've obviously gone through where the marathons looked at oil as a bigger prize, and they quit spending money on the gas side, then you have someone like a Hillport that comes in to leverage those resources and actually, find gas that's out there. I believe there is gas in Cook Inlet. I think we may have to look at some newer technologies, but I think if we keep the players interested and, work on the technology side of things, I think you can continue to leverage and find additional gas in Cook Inlet. That's not to say we aren't looking at other alternatives as a backstop.
If I might just make a comment.
Yeah, we're gonna start cutting back here. We want some audience participation as well, so.
So the background is, up until a few years ago, nobody looked for gas in Cook Inlet. It's not economic. It was all, supply was produced gas and associated gas that came up with the oil. The legislature changed the tax structures, probably overdid it, but, and USGS has always said there's 17 to 19 TCF out there, and the state's geologists kind of authenticated that, so. Yeah, so what the RCA did a few years ago is let the price float up where it was near market and made it doing it. All right, so, thank you.
Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think ML&P is in the process of filing a rate case with the RCA of their own. Is that case going to continue to go forward?
Through the chair, we have filed, the hearing ends today. They in fact are doing closing arguments today. And a decision is expected on March 25th of 18.
Okay.
Can I still follow up to that?
Yeah,
Mr. Steele,
quickly.
very quickly.
Sure.
And maybe this, I don't want to air any dirty laundry, but does any of this deal hinge upon that rate case?
Well, I think, we have a due diligence process. We have made our bid based on what we've seen in the filing and what the assets are as in this filing. If there was some disallowance, which we really doubt will happen, but if there was something special, that's something that we would have to work out through the due diligence process.
I had a couple of questions, just quickly, maybe you can elaborate on centralized dispatch and how that's going to work, or the efficiencies you gain from it in terms of the connections. And then when phase 2, is there any elaboration on that aspect in terms of whether or not that might be a possibility, we might encourage it, and so on and so forth?
Yes, we believe that number one, I think having, an economic dispatch center, basically taking these two put together, you'll have one load balancing area. We believe there will be additional efficiencies beyond the pool, just with being one entity.
Do you have to run a connection, a hard connection?
All the connections are there. It's just a matter of, there's probably a little bit of software work to make it all happen,
Yeah.
but it's very doable. On Fire Island Wind Phase 2, what we believe, there's still, in our opinion, an interconnection issue with the submarine cable. But if the submarine, or if the project was sized correctly, maybe smaller than the initial phase, there is a possibility. We do believe with ML&P, the additional hydro resources, especially with the additional resources at Eklutna, it'll be much easier to regulate the wind. And I think one of the comments we made here is right now we're spending about 10% of Fire Island 1, and we believe with that additional hydro resource, we'll be able to put that down to almost zero.
Great. Mr. Train, do you have something to
You pick up
wind
the
it up?
cost
Then I
of
want
the
to go on.
closure of the BRUs that you'll be buying ML&P from us. You guys planning on that?
You bet. That's just all part of what's built into the rate structure for the gas transfer price. So whatever is reserved, those reserves would go into basically GGET reserves.
And through the chair, they use a similar process to the way that we do. Every MCF that is produced, we collect a portion of the retirement cost, and we set up a fund. And so the fund that MLP has, and when the transaction is completed, would be moved over to GGET, and they would continue the same process. So we do the same thing today.
I just wanted to make sure that when they get ML&P, that cost is factored into it, because eventually there's gonna be paid to close that field down. Thank you.
We don't have much time, but I'd like to open it up to folks out there. If there are any questions, hopefully not too long. We're supposed to wind this up here in 10 minutes. So if you have questions, just give us your name, and we'll hear the questions and hopefully get them answered. You guys are all satisfied, huh?
Well, you must have some.
You guys are all employees, aren't you? Go ahead.
Yes, hello, my name is Mary Ann Pease. I'm the former finance director for MLMP when we acquired the Blue River gas field. I want to commend everyone on the efforts of consolidation. However, there are some additional questions that I'd like to know. There were other offers on the table. What was the price consideration? What were some of the other components? What will be the total value of the defeasance of the MLMP debt, which is tax exempt and at the lowest rate in the nation? So until you see a comparison between all offers on the table, what you're seeing is one view and one perspective. And I think you should also closely look at what the internal transfer price is of gas today at Chugach versus MLMP's internal transfer price of gas. A big component that drives the lower cost of MLMP is associated with their cost of financing. Again, just would be nice to see all options on the table and what they would bring to me as a consumer.
Short answer. Anybody want to address that?
Through the chair, we are working with the other interested parties to gain their release of the NDA, which would allow us to share that information. If they are willing, then we can share that. If they are not, then we can't. And we're bound by it, as are they. So we are working through that process, and we hope that as we continue through the process, we'll be able to provide more information about the other interested parties. We just can't do that today.
Does our agreement transfer to them with the sale of the, or with the merger or sale?
No, and in fairness to Chugach, they don't know who the other parties are.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah,
If
go
it's
ahead.
helpful, the agreements are with the municipality as opposed to with some specific sort of the MLP subset, so they
Gotcha.
stay with, the obligation stays with municipality.
Let me see if there's any other ones.
Well, I
out
wanted to
there.
ask a follow-up to her
Okay,
that I
go
think
ahead.
might help.
Yep.
So is it possible to legally speak about the valuation process that was done? And sort of the general results of what we found to be the value of MLMP?
Through the chair, we did go through a process. We also have an NDA with the company that we utilized for that process, and we are working through with them to have them provide us with a executive summary that they are willing to allow us to share, and we expect that hopefully soon. And then you will potentially know who it was and what they did. What we can say is that this is within the range that was provided.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The assembly will have another public hearing when we have it before us, and so there will be other opportunities to get in and ask questions. Any other questions, comments for the good of the order, Mr.
Just an
Constant?
observation, thank you. So sitting in these rooms, we often have crowds like this when it relates to homelessness and public safety. I'm really glad that this is an issue looking towards a brighter future for Anchorage that's not relating to these kind of lower Maslowian issues that are kind of nipping at our heels. And I would say this is the room filled with more suits and ties than I have yet seen in my term on this. Thank you.
Mr. Dyson.
I think I can say that the Assembly has had a good chance to look at the criteria that was used for evaluation and the submittals that the city said. So the process was at least open to us and subject to confidentiality. So not fair to say that the city and Chugach sat down, did this in a smoky room with nobody knowing or having any oversight. It's okay for me to make that
You
note.
are a fine line, but I think you're fine.
Is that a comment on the fact that we don't allow smoking?
No
in
smoking.
here?
Certainly no smoking.
Any other questions, comments, things that we missed, things that we are going to have more discussions, obviously, as we move on down the line, but I'm really pleased that we have gotten to where we are in the process. It's been a long time coming in terms of we've all known that there are benefits to be had by coming together, eliminating some of the duplications, and I want to thank both organizations for the cooperation, and we will, at that, without any objection, close the